meeting of the Water and Sewer Authority. We have moved our agenda around a little bit to accommodate some potential public comment at the beginning. Is there anyone here wishing to speak? Anybody online? All right, seeing none, we will continue into reports. We have a few reports tonight. We'll start with an update on revenue bond issuance. Wendy?
Mitch with Davenport and company is here to update us. He's going to give us a brief, tell us how last year's revenue bonds are doing and what to expect for the revenue bonds will be great.
Well, good evening. Thank y'all for having me. Again, Mitch Bergolio with Davenport and Company. We're the authority's financial advisor, and thought it would be helpful just to touch base this month. No action from us or is being requested tonight for the revenue bonds. Just kind of wanted to give you all a brief update on the plan for funding the phase 4 improvements coming up. So with that, I think all of y'all have a presentation in front of you. Page numbers in the bottom right corner. Page 2 is just a little bit of an overview background. Last year, you have to go with the funding of phase 3. You all went through a process of establishing a revenue bond credit to finance that project. That credit is still outstanding, that you have the ability to issue additional revenue bonds to fund phase 4 under that credit. When we did this in 2021, for the funding of phase 3, we ended up doing that transaction as we call a direct bank loan. If you all remember, we were going down through the process of potentially issuing public bonds in the municipal bond market. And due to rate circumstances at that time, we were actually able to get very compelling bank rates that were below the expected public sale rates at the time. So we ended up going forward with that transaction with Capital One and Webster Bank. And that interest rate was a 3.24% for 25-year final maturity on that loan. And felt very good about that transaction at the time, given the rates were. As we move forward into funding phase 4, likely going to be a public sale of revenue bonds, given where rates are today. Just a different rate environment. Banks, not seeing banks as competitive as the public markets right now. For example, for a 20-year financing, we're probably going to be doing 25 years term here again. But for a 20-year financing, we've gotten rate quotes anywhere from maybe the very upper 4s, but more into the 5%, as much as 6.25% for a 20-year bank financing. Whereas in the public markets, 20 years, we're looking in the low 4% at 4% range. So there's a pretty big spread differential right now. We're pushing forward with that public sale approach. But if things change like last time, we'll be nimble and we'll keep you all posted. But in order to facilitate that, you all did a lot of the heavy lifting last year. And if you look at page 3, I just thought it might be helpful just to quick rundown of everything that you all did last year to set us up for last year's financing and the future financings. So first off, all of the member jurisdictions and the authority approved an interlocal agreement. As part of that interlocal agreement, there was a joint agreement that the authority can issue revenue bonds to fund projects with up to a final maturity not to exceed June 30th of 2057. And we're certainly going to be under that maturity here on page 3. If you're going back to that.
Page 3.
Yeah, there you go.
You have a clicker right there.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. There we go.
There you go.
And we're going to be under that in 2057 final maturity here. So no need to go back and redo those interlocal agreements. And do not expect there to necessarily be a need to go back to the member jurisdictions again as part of this financing. But part of us being here tonight is just wanted to give you all some information to be able to take back to your teams. Second of all, you all adopted a general trust indenture, and that was something that you entered into with US Bank, who's the trustee of the revenue bonds. They represent right now Webster Bank and Capital Bank, but they would also help you all interface with future bondholders. And that's really the contract that outlines all the key terms and conditions of your revenue bond structure, including things like the rate covenant, which is essentially you all agree to establish rates and charges to produce debt service coverage of 1.2 times, meaning that you are going to collect revenue, pay expenses, and what's left over, you have promised bondholders will be at least 1.2 times the debt service that is owed. And another key point of that indenture is this additional bonds test. It allows you, again, to issue additional bonds in the future, so long as you meet certain tests, essentially showing that you will be able to cover that rate covenant into the future with the proposed bond issue. There was a series indenture done that lays out the interest rates and the final maturities and the payment schedules. We'll need to do another series indenture as part of this upcoming bond issue. A feasibility study was performed by Stantec last year. That's something that the LGC required to approve the revenue bonds. They're in the process of updating that report right now. That is going to be likely required again by the LGC, but certainly if we go into the public markets, this will really be y'all's first public issuance in a very long time. Going to kind of be expected by the market to see something from a third party independent forecaster of the authority revenues and financial performance. And then finally, last year, there was a draft preliminary official statement prepared. That preliminary official statement is the prospectus, you may have heard that term before, or sort of the marketing document for the revenue bonds. That's what's going to be provided to investors to let them know all the details of the revenue bonds that you all are selling, but also the potential risks of investing. It includes all of your key disclosure points that you need to share with the market. That is in the process of being updated right now as well. So all of that's in process, and all of that is a lot of that is done already, and then we'll be doing some updates to a few of these documents. Page 4, you all also, we're pursuing that public sale. You all also went through the process of establishing credit ratings. And ultimately you received credit ratings from Moody's Investor Service and Fitch ratings of a AA to AA, which is a very strong credit rating, 2 steps away from the highest possible rating of a AAA. Feel good about that rating. It gives us access to the capital markets and is going to allow us to borrow at attractive rates. We will need to go back to those rating agencies and ask them to specifically rate our 2024 revenue bonds. Right now that you all have what's called an issuer credit rating, where they just are rating the authority itself. As part of this bond issue, they will rate the specific bonds that we're selling. And those bonds will be rated the same as our issuer credit rating, so long as they maintain our existing rate, which we have no expectation that would change. So specific to the 24 revenue bonds, that again, funding phase 4, the most recent cost estimates, which I'm sure y'all are aware of, about $158 million. About 20% of that cost is finalized at this point through the GMP number 1 and number 2 and the pre-construction and design service contract. The remainder of that, roughly 80%, is anticipated to be in hand by the end of this calendar year. So right now, current estimate, 158 million, 20% of that is locked in. See how things go with the bidding for the remaining 80%, but that's the current estimate. Of that 158 million, it's estimated that Charlotte Water's share will be about 58 million, which leaves us a net funding requirement for the authority of about $100 million. And again, that's what would be funded from the revenue bond issue. As I mentioned earlier, we are looking at funding page 6, these revenue bonds through a public sale, and the authority is re-engaged with the bond underwriters that were working on the transaction last year. RW Baird and PNC Capital Markets. The structure is anticipated, again, 25-year final maturity. And looking at doing 2 years of interest only, kind of during that construction period to allow the capacity to be in place before we start repaying the principal on it. As of November 7th, current market, and rates are down slightly since November 7th, but basically current market, looking at an average interest rate, we call it a TIC rate, a true interest cost rate. It's your effective rate on the bonds of about 4.37%. So low to mid 4% range. Again, remember the 23 bonds were 3.24%. So higher than that, that's just where the market is right now. We've actually, 4%, you can see on the next page, we've actually been higher than that recently, but rates have started to come back down. You know, hopefully we can continue to see that trend of rates coming back down as we head into pricing. But right now, again, low 4% range, slightly higher than the 23 bonds, but you can see on this chart, that's just where we are with the market right now. The interest rate market is higher today than it was a year ago. Page 8, just a quick rundown for you, just so you know who all is involved in the transaction. I won't walk through all of this, but there's a number of parties that are involved in the transaction, all of which are working with you to get the bonds issued and successfully get the funding for this phase 4 project. Last thing for me that I wanted to cover here is on page 9. We're going to give you a heads up on what to expect over the next couple of months. So again, today we wanted to give you this briefing. We will be coming back to you at your December meeting for your first formal action, which is called a preliminary findings resolution. That's where you all will basically affirm your desire to move forward with the financing and authorize staff to submit the application to the local government commission, well as approve the financing team and a number of other items. Then we'll come back to you. We'll be doing some work along the way with submitting the LGC application, talking to the credit rating agencies, but we'll be back to you on January 18th is the current plan to do what's called adopting the bond order. That will be your final action where you're approving the issuance of the bonds subject to certain parameters like a maximum rate and a maximum term. And so that January 18th would be your final approval for this bond issue. We would then be waiting to get to February 6th for the local government commission. That LGC approval is the final approval needed before we sell bonds. And our bond sale is actually going to be the following day on February 7th. That February 7th date is where we'll lock in the interest rates. We'll know on that day what your rates are going to be on the bonds. Again, today it's in the low to mid 4s. It will float with the market until we get to that February 7th date. We'll close on the bonds later in February. That's when we'll have the money in hand. And then there will be some things for you all to do after closing, mostly staff related, but you'll have these funds. You're not going to spend them all on day one, so you'll be able to consider how you want to invest those loan proceeds as you spend them, as you prepare to spend them. And then the last thing that I just wanted to mention again, as you all take things back to your staffs, if we do in fact go forward with the public bond sale, you all will be agreeing to provide continuing disclosure to the marketplace, essentially keeping investors or potential investors up to date with the financial condition of the authority. That's things like posting your audits and your budgets, and if something material happens, like a change in your credit rating, you have to let the market know about that, disclose that. Given the nature of the authority and the fact that the majority of revenues come from member jurisdictions, in public sale financings like this, the regulators require what they call obligated parties to provide continuing disclosure as well. We're working through determining, what percentage share or percentage responsibility of the authority equates to being an obligated party, but it's likely going to be the majority of member jurisdictions who are going to have to provide annually some financial disclosure, particularly surrounding the water and sewer fund to the public markets. And we'll have a plan for how to do that through the authority, or whether your finance staff posts things directly to the website's called EMMA, Electronic Municipal Market Access, is the website that houses all of this continuing disclosure information. So I just wanted to mention that that's something that we'll be working through as we do the documentation, and we'll be able to be sure that you all have a good understanding of what's required there, but wanted to provide that for you as you go back to your staffs as well. All I had to cover tonight, but certainly happy to answer questions.
Are there any questions from the board?
First round of financing we did last year, what was the total amount of that cover phase 3?
5 million.
And this 100 for us, but 158 total. I know at the last meeting we talked about the 70 going to fund these other projects on this list. Is that all the green that covered in our green on here? And the benefit to that is
I'm borrowing for those. We didn't want to, it's not like if we used any of that grant money for the expansion, we would have to back up and start over and slow down the progress because of the state requirements. So we decided it'd be best to apply it to future projects rather than projects that run away.
okay. I knew there was a reason and I couldn't remember it, so I just want to clarify that.
Anything else?
All right.
Excellent. Thank you.
Yes, sir. Thank y'all, and we'll be here the next couple months.
Moving to item 2, update on RFQ and future projects. Mr. Chad.
Right. Members of the board, want to take a quick minute here. We're going to be between Thomas and myself back in front of you guys quite a bit over the next couple of months with some projects that we've got that are kind of getting a kickoff, getting started here. We're in the process right now of multiple RFQs out for statements of qualifications for different studies, different work that we have that we're looking to do. So I wanted to run through all of that just to kind of give you an idea of what all's coming and answer any questions you have. Obviously, the first on the list is the Lower Cottle Creek Parallel Interceptor. That is a project that is been underway and designed for quite some time. We're waiting right now on a final approval from the state. It kind of falls into what we were just talking about there with state money being involved with that. We've got one extra hurdle that's kind of held us up here that they're kind of got to give us their final check off before we can go out to the public to bid on, but that should be out to bid by the end of the year. So we will be back once we receive and canvass those bids to go over those with the board for approval of that bid. Second item there is the RFQ for the WSACC facilities plan and preliminary engineering report. This is what I've talked with you a little bit about. This is taking the master plan to the next step at our wastewater treatment facilities of looking at Muddy Creek and Rocky River. What do we do next beyond our expansion that's underway now? And then what do we do next at Muddy Creek? So this will really get down into the weeds a lot more of what do we do going forward for wastewater capacity within Cabarrus County. So this will look at everything from our existing plants to the potential of siting a new plant somewhere in the county. It's gonna really look at it in an in-depth means and be able to provide back kind of a low-level report of what would be involved with those to the board. Next will be an I&I study. We've kind of been through our system, and I know Concord's done a lot, Kannapolis, Harrisburg, everybody's done a lot. I feel like we've hit the areas that were kind of glowing areas that were like, we really need to do some work here. It's really the step to take a look at with the up-to-date model from the master plan with the metering data that we have of what makes sense next. And where do we go from here? To give you an idea, of the I&I impact that we see, was it April was our high month this year? We were a little over 27 million gallons a day was our average daily flow at the plant. So far this month, we're 17.8. So that is almost 10 million gallons of flow. That was groundwater, rainwater, whatever else was finding our way into our system. Now that's over thousands and thousands of miles and tens of thousands of manholes and hundreds of thousands of joints and clean outs and everything, but trying to really find those items that make sense to find and fix. Not only in our system, but also working with the jurisdiction some, once we complete this study. The next item is a RFQ for some incinerator quencher modifications. This is simply a requirement that our air permit we're gonna have to do a little modification to our exhaust system on our incinerator just to meet requirements within a state permit. So that one's pretty straightforward and one we really have no choice on. We've got to move forward with that. And then the last item there is an RFQ for an odor study for the plant. This really, it ties in with the expansion of the plant, but it's more of taking a look at our real world on-site conditions that we have right now. Where are odors coming from and are there measures that we need to take to address any of those odors at this time? So that's a lot of work that's coming up. I didn't want to just all of a sudden start showing up and just hitting you up with all these. So I wanted to give you a little background on it and get any input that the board may have on these projects as we're moving through this initial phases of these projects.
It looks to me like both the PER and the I&I study are both heavily dependent on this master plan.
They are, yes, they're kind of the next step beyond the master plan. Yes. Yes.
And as far as the incinerator quencher, have those requirements changed? Because I just talked to Thomas about this yesterday.
Right.
And we put in SO2 scrubbers, what I consider not long ago, but and that was because of a change in the requirements.
Yes, sir. That was
right?
the most recent change that we've made because of those requirements. Mark's been more involved.
You want to take that one or me?
I'll try.
All right.
What we have come to learn is the standard for emissions under the Title V requires that there's a certain pressure drop across our scrubbers. The problem that we see that is in our permit, we don't have such language. It's measuring inches of water column. There is no standard for that. So it's just going to take somebody in the regulatory world to go in and start reviewing our permit and compare it against the standard. And they're going to be like, this doesn't make sense. And the way that we operate our emission system now, we cannot achieve the pressure drop that's required in the standard. So we want to get ahead of this wave and deal with it before it becomes an issue regulatorily. So that's what's happening.
And what happened is the Winston-Salem DEQ office has caught on to that and started to enforce that with High Point and Greensboro. The local Mooresville office has not, but it is clearly a requirement that is stated in the regulation from EPA. It's just not within our permit. And so what we have to do is go in and install what's most likely called a variable throat quencher. So depending on your exhaust flow, that throat can be narrowed or opened up to create that pressure drop. Now, if we're running our incinerator extremely hard and pushing our incinerator and moving a lot of air, we get that pressure drop. Yeah. But when we're moving just kind of a day in and day out normal operation standpoint, there's not enough air moving and you don't get that pressure drop. So we're going to have to go in and modify that.
And I assume that the thought process behind that pressure drop is just that the exhaust doesn't travel as far once it exit the stack.
Well, the thought is that the pressure drop proves that the piece of equipment is doing work. Correct. And if you don't have the pressure drop, then the piece of equipment's not doing work. If you have it, it is. And it's kind of a flaw. It is a little bit of a flawed mentality there. But the more pressure drop you have, you're slowing that gas down a little bit, giving it time to be impacted there. So there's some science to it, and then some of it doesn't make complete sense, but it's one we've got kind of jump through the hurdle on.
So is Winston-Salem and Greensboro, are they in the same situation as we are? Their permit is in really what is in conflict with the
I'm sure,
regulatory?
and I said Winston was High Point in
It was
Greensboro.
High Point, yeah, their permit actually dictates that they're supposed to meet certain pressure drop limits through certain parts of their scrubber system. And they were having trouble achieving that, which they had to go back through modifications to their system as we understand it. So we don't want to get into that position because I think there were times that the state even said, you got to shut down. And that comes with other complications and other expenses for us having to haul sludge to the landfill. So we're just trying to get ahead of this one before something happens.
Yeah, the I&I study says system-wide, were we talking about going into the jurisdictions or just our system?
Some of both. That's really one of the things we're looking for from the RFQ back is from some of the engineers to come back and say, these are our ideas. This is what we think will work. These are best practices that we've used or utilized that will help us make a decision on who we select.
Any more questions for Chad? Before we pass it off to Thomas, you want to do a 30-second recap of our site visit this week?
Yes, so I know several of our board members were here yesterday. We did have a site visit yesterday with Senator Newton and Secretary Beiser out at the Rocky River plant. I think it went very well. We had a nice day to take a quick walk around the plant and lay eyes on what's going on. It was the Secretary of DQ. She requested the tour, so that was very good. She seemed very engaged with the plant and what was going on and plans for the future. And I think it was a good spotlight for WSACC with both Senator Newton and Secretary Beiser.
Thank you, Chad.
I'd like to thank Chad for his presentation. He did an excellent job presenting the project and where we were and how we got there and the capacity needs of the county. So Chad really did a good job passing that information on to the secretary and also the senator here again.
Thank you, Chad. Moving into master plan update, Thomas.
Yes, so we talked a little bit about the master plan and kind of some of the things that will come out of the master plan for further work. The master plan itself is still in progress. There are 6 tasks for the master plan. I won't go through them one by one. Task 3 has to do with the NPDES permitting. So that's where we did the model of the entire Rocky River from Mooresville down to Norwood. Did all that work. The model is in review, kind of its second round of review with the state. It's gone in initially. The state had some comments for the folks who developed the model. And then they came out of that, they made some tweaks to the model and they passed it back over to DEQ. So we're hoping to have some input on that fairly soon. DEQ's getting lots of models right now. And so we are in line where they've got what we submitted, but we're just waiting on them to get back to us. From there, our consultants will use that model to develop what they believe are good speculative limits for our facility and defensible speculative limits for an expansion beyond 34 MGD. We can use that model if we end up with expansions or a new plant even in other areas of the county. That model will also be useful for that effort. So that's kind of where we are in the midstream there. We have a number of tasks that deal with flow projections, water resources analysis, and the capital improvement plan. Those tasks are well underway, nearly complete really at this point. Our consultant team is looking at those projections, is looking at the capital improvement plan beyond the 6-year plan that you have in front of you tonight, kind of tweaking those things. And we will be getting up with the member jurisdictions with further input and getting buy-in on any changes that Black and Veatch recommends there. The last task that they will say they are on schedule to complete by the end of the year has to do with the overall documentation for the master plan. So that's not only writing everything up. I know we've shared a number of memos already with member jurisdiction staff, but not only writing everything up, packaging that together, but also the dashboards that we will have. So we will have, I believe, 3 interactive dashboards Couple to do with flow acceptance and flow tracking, and one to do with capital improvement projects. So we look forward to having those coming out of this. So any questions on the master plan?
As far as any MPDES permit going beyond 34, I know we've had discussions several years ago about starting this process because it's a long and tedious process.
Sure.
5-year minimum, I think is what I kind of remember.
Right.
So have we actually started that process, or will it be after we get all this river modeling and the speculative limit and all that? Is that when we start?
Sure. So the river modeling is a key piece. The state required that for the speculative limits process because they didn't have a good model of the Rocky River, a good current model of that. So we embarked on that. So the speculative limits will really be, that will tell us, once we get those and agree on those with the state, that will tell us what we're designing towards for the next expansion. So that will be a key piece in that. That is not the permit itself, but that is the state's first commitment to us that these look like the numbers that you will have. The formal permit will come sometime later, and we will work with the wastewater treatment facilities plan and PER as far as how we request that capacity. If it's at Rocky River, it could be at another, facility into the future, like Chad was mentioning earlier. So.
But to answer your question, we're a lot closer than 5 years from getting a
Yes.
permit because of all the effort that's taking place. We're probably more like 2 years from having that actual permit. The speculative limits is what we need to move forward on designing an expansion. That's the key portion. You really don't have to have that permit in hand until till you're well.
Right. And I know it's just like the permit we had to the 34. I mean, we held that permit for a long time.
Sure.
Yeah. Right.
Correct. And our idea would be to get ourselves back in that position, where we have a permit we're designing for and a permit that we can go to down the road, that we have a plan of whether that's a permit in hand at Rocky River that we're building towards and a permit in hand to locate another plant or whatever that may be, that we do have a long-term.
But I'm assuming those speculative limits are gonna be a lot more stringent than they were on our.
It could be, but we have an up-to-date model. So we were using a model from the 80s that was old and a lot of us worst case assumptions were being made because we didn't have good science to support what the river was really doing. We may find that the model helps us some. They're still going to be tight. They're still going to be tight. I mean, but it may help us from them being overly conservative.
And this is also a tool that consultants can use to do their own work with it. Since we'll have a model of the full river, we know all the other users and their expansions that have been approved. So we can negotiate back and forth with this model.
Any other master plan questions? All right, we'll roll into our monthly expansion update.
Okay. Have some pictures for you here of the plant. For those of you who were at the plant yesterday, it hasn't changed a whole lot from that. So a few things here, just key things that have happened in the last month. This is a big thing. We've got a 42-inch pipe that runs from the equalization influent meter vault. So that's across the road from the admin building all the way out to the equalization basin. So that pipe has been installed and tested. That's good news for us. They are still working on the equalization basin itself, both backfill around it and installing handrail and stairs on walkways up there. They have continued down at the blower building to set pipe supports and pull wire down there. They're working towards getting those blowers installed. We do have those blowers on site, which is a good thing for us. The effluent flume work is continuing there. Sometime in the near future, we will be able to tie in that effluent flume to the processes around it. So that's exciting. Continued work with electrical work at the maintenance canopy as well. Gravity thickeners, they have continued forming there, and concrete placement will resume soon there. And as always, we keep this bullet about electrical equipment. for both the phase 3 and the electrical upgrades effort. The contractor's doing a great job staying on top of that. We just got word today that some of our key equipment made it to Welcome, North Carolina, which is a good place for it to be. That's step 2 in its process. We're glad to have it in the state here. We know where it is.
It's right beside Gumtree.
I believe they have some buildings in Welcome, but there's something up there they're working with it up there. We're glad to have it here. So a few pictures here. Here's the NEF and EQ basin. You can see the backfill that's going in around it. So it's over 30 feet deep, but it's starting not to look like it with the backfill going in around it. Aeration basin 6. This has gotten to the point where a lot of the air piping and supports and handrail, those sorts of things have been in for a good while. So they're doing the more detailed work now. They're putting instruments out there. They're pulling wire. They're really getting some of the finer details down. So it's a little harder to see progress with a big picture scale there. The blower building is also coming along. We do have the blowers on site for phase 3. And so a couple pictures inside the blower building. So the pipe supports down at that far end. Let's see, there. I think we've got a couple pictures closer. Those will be for the blowers that get installed with phase 3, with our current phase. The openings that you see closer to you here, those are for the phase 4 blowers. So we've already got the space for those blowers. We've got conduit and openings for those blowers, but we'll be getting the blowers themselves for phase 4 once we get to that. A couple more pictures. Here's closer up for those pipe supports. So you can see the pipe outside there and the top opening that's coming in. So they're working from both ends with the pipe and the supports to coordinate all that. Gravity thickeners, a little bit of a before and after picture here. So last month, I believe we brought this picture to you on the left of the slabs that had been poured for those gravity thickeners and those curing at the time. Since then, they have got most of their form work up, or a good bit of it at least, for gravity thickener number 3. And so you can see that in the foreground on the right side. And they'll be starting to pour walls in sections for that coming up here soon. The gravity thickeners are actually part of the phase 4 capacity, but this is something we got a little jump on with phase 3. We were able to get in there and work towards that. 103, it's really coming along towards being a finished product. Like I said earlier, this will be the effluent flume where we measure flow leaving the plant. And so really the major thing here, this box is built around some existing pipes. So they've got to get in and either open gates or cut out existing pipes to let the flow be able to go through this facility. And it's really close to being done at this point. The work for the next month. Continuing instrumentation, there's a lot of it at Aeration Basin 6, getting all that in, along with the handrail and toe plate as they go. Continue backfill for the equalization basin. It's a big basin. There's a lot of fill to get back there again. Continue installing interior and exterior pipe and supports at the blower building. We do have 2 electrical substations on site that are right outside the blower building. That's a good thing as well. And we've got the other 2 that are going in that area, should be on the way soon. Beginning concrete work for some pads around the blower building associated with it. Installing ladders, which I understand they're actually did today for those equalization basin effluent meter vaults. Work at the maintenance canopy. They will continue that concrete work for walls at the thickeners. And then the buried piping installation, we are getting ready to start. They are getting ready to start laying that pipe from the other end. So they laid some 42-inch pipe, a good bit of it, out to the equalization basin. They'll now start from the other end and lay to where they started. And continuing electrical terminations as well. I'll be happy to take any questions you might have.
So when we tie in 103 and turn the effluent on, is there any required shutdown for that, or is it just a matter of opening the valve? Or?
So we're working with that on the effluent end. There's an existing gate. And they are going to install a new actuator for that and just leave that existing gate that's been closed for, since the plant was there. They'll leave that existing gate now in the open position. That one's a little bit simpler. On the influent end, they're actually cutting out, I believe it's a 72-inch pipe.
2-inch
70
concrete.
72 on that end. So they'll be cutting out a 72-inch pipe on that end to activate that side and allow flow to go down.
So is there a required shutdown during that process or not?
So we are still working on that with Crowder. They believe they can do it with everything online. So they believe they can rig it and everything in such a way that we do that. We have demonstrated the capability to store flow within the plant. We did that a couple weeks ago. Yeah, a couple weeks ago. We have demonstrated the ability to take some basins offline, be able to keep flow coming to the plant, store some flow inside the plant to give them some time. So they may take advantage of that there. So we'll see, but we've got options either way. It will not be a insurmountable distraction to us to get through it.
And if something were to go wrong during that process of removing the 72-inch pipe, we can just get people out of harm's way and we can open our process back up and we can be back
Right.
to business as usual. So it's not like, oh my goodness, we're in trouble. We gotta do something now.
Right.
So we've come with a better solution to do that.
Yes, we've left ourselves plenty of outs there.
6-foot pipe's pretty big.
It is. Standing there staring down at it, it is.
Any more questions for Thomas before we give him a break? Thank you, Thomas. Appreciate it. All right, moving to unfinished business. We do have our minutes for October 18th, 2023. Any additions or changes to those?
Motion to approve.
Second. All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Opposed? Approved. Moving on to new business, approval of updated longevity policy. That's Robin. She's hiding back there behind a.
Back here behind the podium. Thank you. I would like to, update our longevity policy. As you all know, in today's hiring environment and the retention of employees, WSACC has always had a longevity policy. In 2004, they sundowned that policy and only the folks that were in it at that time remained in it. So we are at a juncture where there are only, I'll tell you, 8 people still in that original program. And so what we would like to do, because of the hiring environment and retention, we would like to implement another chart, if you would, please, that employees that were hired after July 1, 2004 enter into a longevity program that's not quite as lucrative as the previous program, but it also allows us to reward our employees that have been with us at least 12 months moving forward, and hopefully gives them just one little bit more bite of cash that in their pocket that is an incentive for them to stay with us. So at this time, I would like to ask the board to implement the updated longevity policy at the recommendation of costing us at $51,000. And I'd like to pay that in the December 1st payroll, if I could, please.
This is pretty consistent with other jurisdictions right now. I've certainly seen it come up at other places where the county had one and then reinstated some form of a longevity policy. I don't know about Harrisburg, Concord.
We're actually working on a pay study right now and looking at it because it's huge. I mean, the retention of employees is, and rewarding that is huge. So, yeah. And same thing, our son said it around that time as well.
And we have like salaries that will cover this since it
Yes.
wasn't budgeted this year. So.
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, I'd make the motion that we approve the updated longevity policy.
All right, we have a motion. Is there a second?
Second.
Any more discussion? All those in favor, aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? Motion carries. Fantastic.
Thank you very much.
All right, request for approval for phase 3 expansion capacity allocation, Chad.
You'll have to listen to me again. We've talked a number of times about the capacity, the 2.1 MGD of capacity that is coming with phase 3 expansion. The work that was done on Senate Bill 693 opened the door for us to all be allowed to allocate that capacity during the final 24 months of construction, which we are obviously in. Interlocal agreements that were worked through by the jurisdictions laid out how that was to be allocated out. WSACC was approached by the city of Concord for a need to go ahead and get that capacity. The original plan had been to do this as part of our late January, early February update. So our 6-month update, flow adjustment update, and then allocate this capacity out. Obviously, we have the ability to do that now. So that is what we're recommending to proceed with. As I've talked with the board a number of times over the last couple of months, though, we have seen an increase in flows this year over previous years. That is coming down dramatically right now, as I said, with us under 18 MGD so far this month. And I think signs indicate that we're going to probably stay fairly dry the rest of the year. We never know, but we're going to stay fairly dry. If we stay where we're at now, we're looking at about 750,000 gallons worth of capacity that would have to be our increase in flow over the previous year that would have to be taken back from the jurisdictions. That number with a wet December could be as high as 850, 900,000 gallons. So please no one do their rain dances for sure in December. But what we are recommending is that we allocate out of the 2.1 million, that we hold back 900,000 gallons of that capacity until the update into January, just so to not allocate that out to the jurisdictions and then 45 days or 60 days later need to pull it back. As I said, right now, I'm hopeful that the number will be under 900,000 gallons. And if so, then that would be portioned out based off of the 5-year average flows in January with the updates for new connections that will also be available at that time. With that, I don't know, Jeff, if you have anything to say about Concord for that or any questions anyone has.
I think it'd be good to share kind of where we are, just so you guys know the reason for the request. Definitely upholding the board's kind of like, let's not allocate this and then turn around and have to pull it back, and realizing that's difficult on jurisdictions. And at the same time, so our last allocation meeting was March. Is that right, Jeff? And then we canceled in June, we canceled in September because we had none. And so we have a December allocation meeting that we have promised to developers. So we have not had any sort of allocation since March. So you can imagine we've got, let's just say what we're getting, we got a lot more requests from that perspective. And so the reason for the request is just, honestly, it's partly is political, because we feel like from a developer standpoint, it would be only fair that if we know we're getting some of it, it would honor the board's request to hold some back, but to be able to, because we have promised this allocation meeting and had to cancel the last 2. So just to kind of give a little foundation on why that was our request for you guys to consider. Anything else, Jeff?
No, I just, the other thing I think that we've considered is we had a lot of people pulling for us to be able to issue this capacity early. So I think we look for a very conservative approach to kind of get that capacity in everybody's hands as soon as we can without going nuts. And I think the proposed numbers, I feel like gets us to a safe place that gets us all going a little bit, but protects us, come first of the year. So.
And I would like to, the increase in capacity, while it's bad news, if we find ourselves, our weather pattern shifting, and we have a year next year where we're average rainfall or slightly below, we don't even want to talk about the D word, but if we're slightly below average, then it could be an increase in capacity that following year. But unfortunately, the first 6 months of this year were just so wet and such high flows. that it's really been the tale of 2 years for us from a flow standpoint.
So do we know what that number is now?
The increase right now, it was as
No,
I,
I'm talking about the flow. Do we know that flow number?
yeah, the flow number right now for the calendar year, we're up about 880,000 gallons a day right now. It's about where we're at.
The other unknown is we don't know the connections between.
Right, not knowing
you
one of my other
and
person is-
offset some of that growth, but we don't know
We don't know that
how
yet.
quickly they've connected.
Yeah, we won't know that until we start getting the numbers back from the jurisdictions at the very end of the year, very first of the year. We have seen a lot of system development fees, over the last 6 to 9 months. So hopefully that's a positive impact that we'll see in a number of connections. Another thing that I'll let the board know that we're working on that I hope we have for next month is we're going to start tracking on a monthly basis that we can provide to the board. Essentially the number of connections we took on from a flow acceptance standpoint for that month, minus the number of residential connections we collected system development fees for. That should show us over time kind of, is that pot of developer controlled residential units, is it increasing? Is it decreasing? Is it staying kind of level? I don't know that's something we'll necessarily present every month, but it's something that I think could have benefit to be presented quarterly or, every few board meetings to kind of look at. But we've seen that obviously increase over the last couple of years. And it would make sense for it to come down a little bit because things have been restrained just a little over time here, but we should have that information hopefully soon.
I think this is certainly a reasonable, conservative approach to get more in everybody's hands quicker, but pull back so that we're not recalculating this at the end. I'd be amiss though if I didn't take my monthly broken record plug on the master plan to say, this is part of the concern I have when we look at the master plan. And I know you've, presented that earlier here with other locations of plants and what do we do after 40, is that there's just always something, right? Wet weather flows at 900,000. Next year, it might go down, but it might go up.
It might.
Right? It could be 2 minutes. So we have 2.1 million to allocate, and almost half of it is eaten up by the weather. And so, as we move forward 20 years, 50 years, something has to give there. And I don't think those developer controlled allocations are going down based on what you guys have waiting, they're beating down your doors all election, right? When are we getting an allocation?
But we've got a 1 year on ours. So
Yeah.
we have had to make that decision internally, from our bucket.
Yeah.
I know it's 2 years here, but we have not made some people happy, but you're right. It's a political, it's a balance between handing out allocation and then allowing someone to sit on it when it's a precious resource. So yeah, it is.
I think it'll take a long time for our demand to underpace
Absolutely.
our allocations here, and it's just it's a concern. So
Yeah, definitely.
again, I'll be the broken record each time we talk about the master planning, but go big. And as I'm on the topic, the system development fees and developers are asking for this. We have $528 million worth of projects here through FY30, and 0.5% is funded through system development charges. And that's going to be a problem for that community when they come asking the public at large to pay this in fees, when 99.5% of it is being paid by us selling bonds and being paid back through rates or taxes, depending on how the jurisdictions are doing it. So I think those are two glaring problems that need big solutions.
And the headlines are that the reason that individuals cannot build houses is because of governmental entities.
Yeah.
The only other apprehension I'd have about taking action on this tonight is that Mount Pleasant and Kannapolis are not.
Yeah, I know that Kannapolis has expressed support for this this proposal. I do not any conversation with Mount Pleasant at all.
I just gotta imagine from our past conversations that they would support it because they're asking for allocation.
From a jurisdiction standpoint, there's not really a negative Get it now, get it later, having some of it sooner.
And the true up will be reflected also in, we're hoping in that January number, all of this will be reflected when
Yes.
something is really, okay.
It's not far off either.
And that'll be clearly spelled out. And let it goes out to the jurisdiction, to the board.
Any other comments?
I would make a motion to approve.
Motion, is there a second?
Second.
Motion is second. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Opposed? Motion carries. Thank you, Chad. All right, now a request for approval of accepting some cash money.
Well, as I mentioned earlier, we have to do a lot of paperwork to draw down state federal grants, and this is one of the things that we need to do is adopt a resolution authorizing authorized representative to complete all the applications and file the reimbursement request and all those things that have to be done to draw down the money. So for the 42.125 million, we received in the previous governmental grants from the previous years, asking for authorization to draw down those funds, to designate me as the authorized representative so we can draw down those funds and complete the applications.
Got a motion?
Do we need a backup to that?
It only asks for one, but we can redesignate someone if we need to, but they only allow one at a time. We've tried that before.
Second. Motion and a second. Any other comments? All those in favor, aye? Any opposed? Motion carries. Moving on to number 4, early adoption of the CIP.
Mitch had mentioned earlier that we have to have a third party do a feasibility study for us. As part of that, we had to give the feasibility study our capital improvement plan because they could look and see how we were going to pay for the projects in the future. We adopted the CIP in our last budget based on early numbers from Black and Beach. But since that time, we've received the 69 million in state grants, and for the feasibility study person to look at that as being funded with bonds or borrowing or some other method would inflate what we would have to pay. So we did a quick updated CIP that we've already shared with a feasibility consultant, showing how we could possibly allocate that money to cover these projects. This by no means, no way means this is way that we will actually spend this money. We will do them just as needed based on probably some of the work we do with the I&I study and some of the other things we look at to determine the timing we really need these projects and when they need to be done, and then rebidding them and see what the cost truly is. So the money could shift around, but this is just a way of designating and showing in our financials how our future could possibly look and show that we could cover all expenses in the future. So again, this was put together quickly. Normally we give you a very detailed CIP with detailed descriptions of each project and all and things like that. We will put that together when we bring the next budget to you in February with updated this again, but with the project descriptions and more information, and ask you to do that. But they like to, the rating agencies prefer to see a board adopted CIP. Is what I'm asking. So if they ask us during our discussions, we have a board adopted CIP, we can say yes. And I'll be glad to discuss any of the projects. This is based roughly on the master plan timing and estimated dollars. Staff, we met several times over the past few weeks and did some tweaking and moving around based on our knowledge of the system more in depth than they did. Move some of the projects around, but basically this is a reflection of the master plan. Any questions? I'll be glad to answer them.
So this document was shared with the feasibility folks for the bond, issuance. Will they want to see an approved, by the board document, though, right?
The rating agencies most likely want to see it more than the feasibility study person, but Rich is here and he can answer those kind of questions.
Yeah, I mean, it doesn't have to be an officially adopted CIP for purposes of the feasibility study. It's a projection, it's a forecast. But it's nice when talking to the rating agencies, particularly given the timing, to be able to say, we did have a CIP, we got some grant money from the state, it allowed us to move some things around, got some updated project costs. This is a revised CIP that's been presented to the board and signed off on, approved, that's included in the feasibility. So it just adds a little more weight to the conversation.
And then that'll change again. Once we get the master plan back and we project out to 20.
It could, yes. And as we do our studies that, we were talking about on the facilities plan, this could change around, based on what they determine. We've got a phase 4-5 expansion down here. We're to 40, it may be 38, maybe a new plant. It could be different things. Combination, yeah. So anyway, these are mainly placeholders, especially that one.
I like your warning, although I'd call it a qualifier. Warning in front of a rating agency.
I don't want to invite any of the developers or builders to rely on this as the gospel.
Understood.
Any questions?
Michael, that state money from the budget approval, are there timeline restrictions on that money?
We're still trying to find that out. As far as we can tell, there isn't.
That's beautiful.
It's kind of odd. It makes you want to shake your head, but that's what we've gotten so far. I'm not sure the exact funding source yet. We haven't been able to identify that, whether it's purely state money or federal infrastructure money or ARPA money, but we're still trying to get those things sorted out.
Any other questions? All right, we'll entertain a motion to approve. Is there a second? Motion and a second. All those in favor, aye?
Aye.
Any opposed?
Thank you.
Carries. All right, we do have a closed session tonight, so we will entertain a motion to go into closed session according to GS 143-318-11A1. Is there a motion?
The move.
Second. Motion and a second. All those in favor? Aye. Any opposed?